also our president of Phoenix, and I'm really excited to have you guys up here and this event. I'm looking forward to learning a bunch, and thanks everybody for being here.
Before I get started is I wanted to let you know that PAC has a couple more things coming up, and we're kind of tying them all together in this fall season. So starting next week, I believe, we're going to be starting a social media competition. So Instagram and Facebook, I think, or we will be posting the details of that. But the premise is we want you to get registered to vote if you are not, and we want you to vote in this election because it's a smaller election coming up. There will be specifics like do not take a picture of your absentee ballot, but we will put all that information in there, and then we will draw one of the participants who's tagged us, and they will win a gift card to Ocotillo, one of our neighborhood restaurants. So we're hoping that'll kind of encourage everybody to get into their civic participation mindset before the election, and then our next event is the Tuesday before the election. It is, or I guess, election day, because we're not electing anyone really this year. We're having a How to Be a Good Voter event. It's going to be virtual. We're finalizing some speakers, but as of right now, we have the Maricopa County Recorder speaking. So we're very excited about that. And just a little plug, his wife is one of our newer active members. So yeah, we're excited to have that connection. Okay, I think that's it. If you are in person and have a question, please raise your hand when you have that question, because we want to make sure we kind of stick to these broad topic areas. Zoe will be monitoring the chat for anyone who is online that has a question and will speak up if it's sort of subject specific. Otherwise, we will definitely have time at the end, so feel free to hold some as well. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm very excited about this panel. They're very knowledgeable in this area. So Claire Knipe is that correct? Okay, great. So we were just talking earlier. She was born and raised in Tucson. She currently lives there, went to U of A, so very proud Tucson native. She graduated from U of A with a major in political science and gender and women's studies, so very apropos of today. And she is the political director for Arizona List. And Arizona List is dedicated to electing pro-choice Democratic women to state and local office in Arizona. It's one of the largest political networks and financial resources for female candidates, and the only super PAC dedicated to electing women in Arizona. Casey and I, full disclosure, went to law school together. Casey is also a Tempe native, or is a Tempe native, but also an Arizona native. And she also attended ASU for undergrad, is that correct? So she is an attorney, a climate organizer, and a football fan. She's running for Tempe City Council for the second time. And then our third panelist is Sarah Mueller, who is also an Arizona native and a political consultant who has worked on a variety of successful candidate and ballot measure campaigns across the state. In her role as political director for Governor Doug Ducey, she manages his political committees and led the effort from Arizona's For Strong Leadership that held the Republican majorities in the state House and Senate in 2020. So to our topic today, that is women running for office, or sort of maybe women in politics more generally. I'm very passionate about this issue, as I said, that more women run for office and that more women should work on campaigns and work in politics. Women are almost uniformly less exposed to politics while growing up and in college. But that hasn't really been true, I think, for most of us. And so I'm hoping each of you could talk a little bit about your personal experience in political campaigns, or how you got to the role you have now. Claire, do you want to start?
Yeah. Sorry, so I'll go ahead and start. So thank you so much for that introduction. As she said, I'm Claire Knipe. I'm the political director for Arizona List. I first got involved in politics when I was just 15. I started a Young Dems chapter at my high school with a couple of friends, and then quickly got plugged into the county party, which was just walking distance from my high school. Still is, they're still in the same locations down in Tucson. And from there, I got really involved in High School Democrats of Arizona, which is really focused on getting high schoolers involved, connected to local campaigns, doing voter registration drives, things like that. From there, kind of got plugged into the national structure. I was the chair of Arizona High School Dems and sat on the national board my senior year of high school. After that, I went on a couple conferences and trips. And I came back after graduating high school and realized I didn't know where to go from there after all of my activism having been in a very specific spectrum and sitting in a really specific place. At that point, I actually is where I found Arizona List, which is where I work now. The person who introduced me to the county party was working there at the time and said, hey, we're looking for interns. So that was in 2016. I first started interning. I've been on staff with Arizona List since 2018, that cycle, but I've also worked with a various number of candidates, local candidates down in Tucson, largely all through our county party, but I really started with volunteering for Ron Barber, who ran for Gabby Giffords' seat in 2013, because that's my congressional district, and then just working for local candidates for our city elections are on off years. So we have an election every single year with candidates. So there's always a lot going on and just, there's always things going on. So just volunteering for local candidates and such.
So as Nicole mentioned, my name is Casey Klaus. I'm running for Tempe City Council. I first got involved similarly in high school with when my mom decided to run for school board. My school had an air quality issue and she decided to run to fix that because the school board didn't want to put any resources toward fixing the air quality. So just, I saw like parents getting together and so we, like collected signatures and stuff like that. But then chose to be involved in issue-based organizing. So I did organizing in college around LGBTQ issues and around climate. And I love issue-based organizing, did vote organizing, getting folks just registered to vote. I've done a lot of like nonpartisan stuff after doing sort of like some candidate work as well. And most recently worked for an organization doing their vote program, a religious nonprofit to get religious folks into the electoral space and how to vote with your religious values and just get involved based on religious beliefs. And I love that, but I also believe in electoral work that is partisan or like candidate based, and decided to run for city council because I think our city council, there's specific issues. I'm sorry, I'm like trying to be nonpartisan. There are specific issues that the city council gets to change that I think are really important and that we need both like issue-based organizing and electoral organizing to make changes in the community.
Just real quick before Sarah gets started, Casey is doing a great job. It's very hard. Junior League is a nonprofit, so we are absolutely nonpartisan and we don't endorse any specific issues or candidates. And Casey's currently running for office as a candidate. So she's doing a great job, but that's why she's sort of having that dance and just for everybody's clarity. So go.
I'm Sarah Muller, and I actually got my start in the political space a little bit later than my colleagues here, my fellow panelists. And for me, it was actually, I was working my first job out of college on the Hill for Congressman John Shattuck, answering phones. And when he decided in 2010 that he wasn't going to run for re-election, I got a call from some folks that I had interned for and worked for back in Arizona who said, hey, we know this guy, Doug Ducey, he wants to run for state treasurer, he's been selling ice cream. How would you feel about moving home to run his campaign? And at the time, I had done some volunteer work, I'd made phone calls, I delivered yard signs, but I was like, I don't really know how to do this. And they were like, yeah, we'll talk you through it, it'll be fine. So, I gave my notice, packed up everything in my cars, like I said, working in DC, and moved out here to work on the campaign. And honestly, it was the most fun job I could have ever imagined. I thought that I wanted to do policy work, and this is just going to be something to help me like bridge the gap. But I started in campaigns and never really looked back. I did 1 year in 2015 in the actual governor's office after Ducey got elected. And I lasted about a year before I went back out to campaign life in 2016 for the even number year.
And I think that that's true of a lot of people that work in campaigns, but it can be kind of hard to enter that space if you're not familiar or you don't happen to have someone ask you to be a part of that. So generally, women have a greater, I think, desire to volunteer. I know our membership certainly reflects that. And I think that campaigns can also be seen as volunteering to improve your community. You know, Casey mentioned a little bit, there are issues that these politicians get to make decisions about, or you know, the issues themselves, like the referendums this year, are being voted on directly, and that can make big change in the community. So I guess, can you speak a little bit more about what it's like to work on a campaign and maybe how you can get involved if you don't have that person that's saying, come join us? Do you want to start, Sarah, since you have a lot of experience about that?
Sure. So, you know, I would say if you like call up a campaign or, you know, see some candidate that really speaks to you, there's like a pretty good chance that the slot that they're going to try and put you in is sort of voter contact of some sort. And that's going to look like probably making phone calls, sending text messages, knocking on doors, maybe going to an event to represent that candidate and talking with folks or getting petition signatures. But one of the things that I sort of want to encourage people and that we've seen be helpful on campaigns I've done is if you've got a skill and you can make that known to a campaign, we will use it. So if you, for instance, really love photography and are a great amateur photographer, we'd love to have you, you know, come to one of our events and, you know, take pictures that the candidate can post on social media or that we might be able to use in a mailer. If you're a really good copywriter for advertiser, or maybe you just are a good writer because you read a lot. You know, those are kind of skills that we can use. If you want to bake the cupcakes for, you know, the Saturday phone bank, like we will take it. So campaigns are, I would say, pretty open to help in any way we can get it. So I wouldn't want you to feel limited to by what you might be asked if you just kind of cold call or reach out to a campaign. There are a lot of different things that we can do to incorporate someone's specific skill set. If you just let us know, you know, what you like to do, what you think you're good at, and how it might apply, because I would say I'm not the most extroverted person, and there's so much of campaigns that's, you know, about meeting people, but I've still found my place and my way, and ways to be helpful and part of that team.
Claire and Casey, I know that, you know, we spoke generally sort of how people can help, but also maybe how is either entering a campaign that's an issue-based campaign or entering through those advocacy roles like you were speaking to, Casey, how is that maybe different than the experience that Sarah talked about?
Sure, yeah. I think one difference with issue-based organizing is it happens all the time. And so and sort of happens on the off years a lot, like pushing elected officials to do their job or like make a change that you want to see is not likely to happen when they're campaigning. They're more likely to, you know, make work happen when they're not busy at events, speaking, trying to raise money, knocking on doors, whatever the person is doing. Also, issue-based organizing, people don't see as like, some people see politics as gross or it's yucky, it's whatever they think. And if you talk to them about education, like they love education, you know, or you talk to them about women's rights or affordable housing or homelessness, like these things people are more like don't see as political, even though they are. And so it's like a little bit easier to get into. I love knocking on doors and phone banking. I think it's great. I love voter contact. But I do want to echo, if you have skills that you want to use, people would love that. Like campaigns, issue campaigns, candidate campaigns, anyone. I've got 3 data folks. And so one is a data science student, one's a recent graduate, and one has like 10 years experience at IBM before just like wanting to volunteer on a campaign with this skill. And I know nothing about data science. That's not my field. I work as an attorney. I could do that for someone, like negotiate a contract. I got you. Find out what they do. No idea. So if you don't like knocking on doors or making phone calls, you can still plug into politics.
Yeah, so to add to that, first, I do really want to echo that, but there is absolutely something for everyone. One thing that I will say is one of the biggest needs when I work with candidates, so in the capacity of my job, a lot of what I do is I work with candidates, individual women who are running for office. I help them set up their campaign, do all of that initial groundwork, and then do regular meetings to make sure your campaign is on track, you know what to do, you know what deadlines are coming up, things like that. And one of the biggest needs that we have is for someone who can run social media. A lot of our candidates who have, say, been in the legislature for a number of years or have been on the county board of supervisors, something like that, tend to be a little bit older or just not have the time for something like social media. So someone who can say like, well, I can post that photo easily, or like writing a caption and putting some hashtags on it is second nature and takes me 5 minutes. For someone else would take them genuinely 45 minutes, because that is just so like Instagram is terrifying. I've worked with candidates who are like, I don't know, it scares me. Like, I don't know what to do. So like there are absolutely things that need to be done that everyone needs help with. The other thing that I would say is that there is so much chance for change at a local level that you often aren't thinking about. Casey talked a little bit about school boards earlier. Your school boards have control over so much individually in those schools, and those are unpaid positions. So when people are running for school board, they need all the help they can get. So if you find someone who says, you know, I'm running because there's this really specific issue, they're looking to close these schools and I want to keep them open because they're my neighborhood schools, and that's your neighborhood, helping that candidate is such a direct cause and change to your community that you're getting to see these changes. The state legislature is the same way. You know, if you're upset about education cuts or different issues, you can get so directly involved with your state legislative candidates, and they're real people. You know, like they're the average person that is your neighborhood. You know, it's a soccer mom. It's someone who works down the street from you. A lot of these candidates have other jobs. They're much more approachable than you might think. But there is such a capacity for change that I think that finding a local candidate that speaks to you, speaks to the issues you care about, whether that be school board, justice of the peace, constable, any office, you get to make such a change that volunteering with those local candidates is just so worth it.
Yeah, Zoe, I have some questions from the chat, which I think do go off of kind of where we're talking right now, but the question is, in general, why do you think that women are more hesitant to run at all?
If I could, that was actually going to be not that exact question, but we can definitely touch on it. But women in general view themselves less qualified to run for office. But if you look at, you know, we can just look at the state house and Senate, the current, you know, people in those roles have a huge variety of backgrounds, education levels, locations, you know, so there really is no specific qualification to run for office. Maybe there is for a specific position, but you know, I guess both to answer that, maybe what do you think are some of the barriers, but also what are you know, factors to consider when you're thinking of running, maybe some pros and cons of being in a role like that. Obviously feel free to speak as specifically or generally as you like. That's a lot of questions, but kind of related. Claire, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I love that question, first of all. If I could get the mouse back in here. So one of the things that we often hear from Emily's List, which is kind of our national affiliate, is that women have to be asked 7 times to run for office before they even seriously consider it. And I think that the world's most average man who wakes up and looks himself in the mirror and says, I should be president. I think that a lot of it comes down to women take considerations of everything a lot of times. And when you look at running for office, it is a really big jump. And to do that, you often need support. I think of women who have children often they're the ones who need to figure out childcare. Men who have children that are running for office often never have to think about that. You know, it's women that often a lot of those things fall to. Who's making sure your family eats it? I have a lot of candidates who've been like, yeah, my husband ordered pizza 3 times last week. That's not great. Like, you're having to take on extra considerations. And so sometimes a campaign is such a big responsibility that you're thinking through all of that. It doesn't make sense. I think that women also just tend to doubt themselves a lot more and think that they are not the person to do that. I think that a lot of times elected office can look really scary, can look really intimidating, especially when you don't know the process, you don't understand what it is. It just kind of, as Casey said, politics in general is this like scary cloud in the sky that like professional politicians do in DC, and it's this very serious work that certain people are put out for, and it's all lawyers and people who are really wealthy. And in reality, your school board is probably 5 parents from the district who are all unpaid that meet every 2 weeks to talk about policies. Elected office does not have to be as scary as it seems. And I think that that's really one of the big barriers. I will also say that Arizona looks better than a lot of other states. Our state Senate, I know that we've had a recent appointment, but was 50-50. And our state house is very close, and most states are hanging out at like 30% women. So Arizona actually looks a lot better than most states. But I think that that's due to some really concerted effort in asking women to run and saying there are open and available seats. You should run. Who else knows your community better? And so I would implore all of you to ask yourself that question. Who knows your community better? What these offices look like? Are there people who are not serving your community in the way that they should? Or are there just open seats that often, again, I'm going to keep going back to school boards. There are a lot of seats that just don't get filled because no one runs. And then those just get appointed. Question.
Question/comment. There are 2 great organizations here in Arizona, Dodie London and Emerge, and their entire focus is training women to work in politics and or run for office. The question for you, has any of you done either one of those programs? And or do you think that those are beneficial and helpful, or do you think that a woman could just, like men do, because you're so right, and I've heard that statistic so many times, women have to be asked 7 times. Do you think that if one of us in this room wants to run for something, that they should seek out some of those programs, or just kind of wing it and go for it?
So if I can jump in really quick. So one, I'd like to say that Casey and I actually did Emerge together in 2019. So as it stands right now, Emerge Arizona does not exist.
Oh,
yes. But what I would say is that it's absolutely worth it. The training was useful, but also just going through as a cohort of women who were interested in working in politics or running for office. I can tell you, like, we have a group chat that folks from our group will say, like, hey, I'm getting ready to run. Can anyone help? Like, can anyone help me do call time? Can anyone help with this event? Just things like that. But I would say that you absolutely can show up and run. I would look into do just some kind of trainings that can help fill in the gap, even of like, here are the legal responsibilities, or like, here's what filing and finance looks like. Like, I would look into some kind of trainings, but it doesn't have to be a really formal program. But I would say that I think Emerge is definitely a great place. And there's a bunch of other groups that do trainings as well.
Sarah, maybe you can answer that next, because I know, Casey, as our candidate on the panel, you sort of can answer that pro-con question, I think, a little more specifically.
Sure. So I haven't done the Dodie London program, but a lot of my friends have. I feel like I've seen folks either come through that and decide they want to engage or run for something, but also kind of go outside of that. And one of the things that I would say is that there's like a pretty good chance that just being a citizen, you know someone who knows somebody that's involved. And, I'll get calls from, somebody like my mom will be like, hey, my friend's daughter is graduating from college. She wants to get hooked up with an internship, Republican or Democrat. They'll call me and say, who can we connect with? And you can help people kind of in that way. There's probably a really good chance that if you asked or mention it, that you know someone who knows, you know, a candidate, a former candidate, somebody who's, you know, donated to a candidate and met them that way, or somehow gotten, you know, involved in some sort of issue type group, kind of in the community. As you think about what to run for, I would say there are sort of two things that are good questions to ask yourself. So the first would be, are you an executive personality or a legislative personality? And actually, when Doug Ducey was looking at getting involved in public office, he met with Senator John Kyle, and Kyle asked him that question. He was like, well, geez, I've been a CEO for the last, you know, however many years, like I'm definitely an executive personality. And so Kyle encouraged him to seek out an executive position, which is part of what led him to the role of state treasurer, because of his finance background, but because you're sort of leading that office versus something like running for the state legislature. The other thing that I would say is worth asking is, are you looking to be in a policy-making position running for elected office? Because we often think about, you know, running for governor or state legislature or school board or somewhere where you're going to be voting on policies, but there are jobs like state treasurer, county treasurer. Justice of the peace is a 4-year term that's an elective office in Arizona. And so there are a number of things that you can run for that aren't necessarily about policy making 100%. A lot of that job is about bringing really strong sort of administrative or you know, critical thinking skills to a particular role that's selected by the public.
And we'll touch on that a little bit more as well. But one thing I did want to highlight that Sarah said was, you know, if you are looking to be involved, whether it's to run for something or to seek maybe sort of that mentorship and training that we talked about, or just to volunteer for something, I mean, quite honestly, just Googling things in that issue area that you're passionate about will lead you to events. I mean, anyone who is running a issue or candidate campaign is constantly going to be trying to have events to get the public more involved, to solicit donations. So just don't be afraid to talk about politics. I know at least our parents' generation, you know, you weren't really supposed to talk about it in case you didn't agree, but I think we can say now, you know, politics is around us all the time, perhaps not in a format or a level that you want it to be, but don't be afraid to talk about it with your, you know, partner, neighbor, parent, cousin, whatever, because I think putting out there what you are interested in and asking the same in response is how a lot of those connections get made, like not being afraid to say like, okay, you know, I'm not expecting that you agree with me on this, but I have an opinion, I like this thing, I want to know more about it, and then who knows where the resource might come from. But I think a lot of times, especially women, are afraid to ask because they don't want to be seen as overly opinionated or too aggressive about something. But I think there's a very friendly way to solicit that information too. Okay, Casey, go ahead. Oh, yeah. So
would you like me to answer?
yeah, right. Lots of things we've covered, right? And I guess to any of which you'd like to speak to is fine, but I think the unique perspective you can provide us is being a current candidate as well as previously running, you know, what I think pros did you see to that role beyond your prior advocacy roles? And then maybe what have you found or knew in advance were going to be drawbacks for you in choosing to be a candidate for office?
So when deciding to run for Tempe City Council, I thought of what is the issue I care about and who has the power to change that issue. And so if you're really passionate about like your neighborhood schools, school board is great. If you're really passionate about evictions, constable or justice of the peace is great. If you really care about land use and zoning, then city council is your role. And that is what I really care about, because I think land use and zoning like shapes how people live their lives dramatically. And so that is why I like chose this role specifically. Pros, I mean, there are so many pros to running for office. Like, people will support you and you will have this, like, it feels great to develop a team and like have this team of people become friends and become like lifelong connections with each other. And there's something about running for office that's what it feels like sports, in that like you have this really tight knit team that is fantastic. And like, as the candidate, you are the person who knows the least in the room because everyone else is very talented in their field, and telling you, you know, their expertise. So you get to learn from the photographer what to do. Like, I don't know how to pose for a picture, but they'll tell me what to do. Or the person who runs field, like, they know better about that than I do. And so it's great to learn from everyone's expertise. I think some questions to think about are the financial impacts. I live alone, so I need a job. I need health insurance. I'm a like person who has chronic illness, so health insurance is a big consideration for me. So I have to work, and so I can't take off time to run for office and not have health insurance, and I can't take off time even when elected because I need health insurance. And so finding a job that's like part-time might be a better role for someone in my situation than running for a job that doesn't allow you to have another job. Because there are part-time roles that are really like full-time. Like, the state legislature needs part-time because they meet part of the year, not like they meet after work hours. And so it's not really a role that like fits for certain people. Another, let's see, I don't know. I would say one con of running for office is that, I mean, there's so many pros, I don't want to make it sound negative. On one hand, people are the nicest. Like, I generally believe in like the good in people, and people are so great. And I love having conversations about issues, and it's like great to hear when someone is talking about like, my recycling didn't get picked up, and like, how can we change this? And the city set down the cardboard recycling facility, and like, I think we should really have that again. And I love talking to people about city issues. And sometimes people will say mean things to you, to your face, because of whatever. They like feel empowered to talk about the level of your voice, or last night I was lectured on my age by someone who lectured me, went away, came back and like wanted to finish lecturing me about how I was too young. And so I think the consideration was like, can you grow a thicker skin to deal with the fact that sometimes, specifically men, but sometimes women, are going to say negative things about you if you put yourself out there. And if you can, like, great. I also think like it doesn't not impact people, right? Like, I'm sure Claire has seen this, like, you like want to go eat ice cream, but you're at the event, so you're like, wait, and then you're like, go have ice cream at home and like tell your friend like, oh, this person was so mean. And that's like what your support team's for, because also being friends with a candidate is like very helpful. Yeah, I think, but there's so many pros. It's so great. I think changing your community is like joyous work, right? Like, whether that's volunteering for a candidate or a campaign, or running for office, is like fulfilling work to change the community that you live in.
So we have a question. Zoe, why don't you ask it yourself? Since it's your
Okay,
question.
this is my question. So let's say you know someone who's maybe interested, okay? Like, hey, I can see myself getting more involved in 5 years. All of you three have essentially been working in politics since high school, college. I think in the post-2016 era, we see a lot of people that are coming from non-traditional backgrounds. Would you say, in your experience of maybe knowing someone who comes from like corporate versus like politics or nonprofit, do you see a huge difference, like is it better to spend the next 5 years, like fully not making any money, working in a nonprofit? Or can you be successful as a candidate coming from the corporate side over into, you know, the political sphere? What do we see there?
I don't know, what, Sarah, go ahead.
I'll take a stab at it. So, I would say you can really come from any background, and there's always an appetite. I know we feel like we're sort of seeing it now, but when Doug Ducey ran in 2010 for state treasurer, it was the year of the Tea Party, and there was a real appetite for outsiders. There's always an appetite for fresh energy in elections for candidates. And so the thing that I would ask folks to consider is sort of how are you going to build support? And that might look like having been previously really involved in campaigns or policy issue based nonprofits. But that could also look like being really involved in your Rotary Club or mentoring other entrepreneurs or just really involved in your PTA or something at your school. And so I would think about it much more broadly in terms of what a network of support looks like. It doesn't necessarily have to be political support, but it's, are you meeting people and expanding, the circle of folks that you know, sort of more broadly. And I think that can take a lot of different forms that, might be corporate, might be volunteerism. It really just depends on how you want to spend, your time and what's fulfilling. It might be your church.
Yeah, so I want to echo, first of all, a lot of what Sarah said, absolutely, is I think that there's no one specific answer to that question, absolutely. Because I think that one of the things that we look for the most when talking to candidates and working with candidates is community support. Who do you know in your community? A lot of times we talk about running for office, you think about like, how do you get people to remember you? What is your brand, all of that? When it comes down to it, the only branding you have is your name. Because that's all people see when they walk on election day to the ballot box or when they look at their ballot is your name. They don't get to see your logo or your face or all of those things, just your name. So how many people in your community, if you were to run tomorrow, would vote for you just by knowing your name? Because they say, well, I know that person. She babysat my kid for years. She's great. Or she lives down the street from her. I know her. Or I always run into her at this place. You're able to build that community. Some of the candidates, I think, in 2020 that were able to get over the hurdle of COVID and doing things virtually were the folks who already had built-in support, who had, say, started an organization in their community, and when they announced running, had about 1,000 volunteers. We had a candidate like that in 2020 who, when she said she was running for the state legislature, there were genuinely about 1,000 people who said, how can I help? Because she had gotten all of these people to say, like, let's get involved, let's start, let's get working in politics. And she started a local organization that did a lot of organizing. So when she decided to run, she had built in support. Yes, she did the work of campaigning and all of that, but she automatically had people who knew who she was. They trusted her as a leader, and they knew that they wanted to vote for her. So if you have roughly 5 years before you think you're going to run for office or you're ready, I would say get as involved with your community as possible. Think about those issues, do issue advocacy, do any kind of advocacy you can. I keep coming back to school board because it's a really good example, but if you have issues with your school, show up at school board meetings, show up at your PTO. What does your site council look like for your schools? Look at and just be involved, be a body in the room so that people know who you are. And that's how you build those relationships, how you just get more involved with the community.
Do you have anything you want to add? It's okay if you don't. I feel like that covers a lot of it. Yes. Okay.
Follow-up question.
Yes.
Like, how do you financially make it work? Because like House legislators make $24,000 a year.
So just to clarify, how do you make, once you're in the role, what you're making work?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
like even leading up to it. I mean, if you're running for an office, I know Claire, you mentioned maybe some 4-2 jobs, but like if you're constantly campaigning, you either have to have your savings or like how does, because I think that also can be limiting, especially for women who are, their sole bread earners. Like how do you?
And that is when I spoke earlier about the background, the diversity of industries that are the backgrounds of a lot of our state House and Senate representatives, you know, one of the things that is much less true is the diversity of household income levels, because they make, I think now is it a little bit higher, but it's under $30,000 a year for their 4 months of over full-time work. But it's awkward, right? It's not part-time each week, it's 4 months out of 12. So you can't be a teacher, you can't be a lot of specific jobs. You maybe used to be, but it does make it hard in that. So yeah, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's more of a question of, do you know how some people maybe would made it work that weren't independently wealthy when they went into it?
So, you know, I would say if you look at specifically our state legislature, there are folks who, you certainly do get folks who are like sort of retired. You'll have folks that are sort of either self-employed or work with an employer who's pretty like flexible about things. So you actually get a fair number of sort of entrepreneur types who have the ability to have some flexibility around their hours and setting their schedule. But actually there are folks who teach either at the university, community college, or even high school level who've been able to work with their employers. So they're like, you know, teaching for a particular, you know, semester, or typically the legislature's not really doing much on Fridays. And so like they'll teach their classes on Fridays when it's really unlikely that you would have a committee hearing. So I do think it's definitely possible to do it while working. I would say specifically with the legislature, which is a different situation, as you've kind of noted from other positions that we can have that are more conducive to full-time work. It really has been about either folks, you know, having some flexibility with their employer, or being sort of, you know, self-employed and consulting or something like that, where you do have a little bit more control and flexibility with your schedule. And, you know, for some folks, that's, you know, they work in the legislature and, you know, they also work for, you know, a nonprofit that is involved in, you know, different issues in the community. So I think there are definitely ways to make it work, but having that conversation with an employer, or having an employer who's willing to work with you a little bit on the scheduling is a real feature.
Yeah, and maybe we can highlight, kind of goes into my next question, but maybe we can highlight some other elected positions that maybe don't have that conflict.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say, as you first start considering running for office, talk to your employer first, at the very least, to figure out, do you need to resign to run? Do you need to take a leave of absence? Sometimes there are also conflicts of interest with your partner's work. There are a couple of legislators who have to excuse themselves from votes because, say, their spouse works for a particular department at the state. Representative Germain is someone that comes to mind. She often has to excuse herself from votes. But I'd say that it's honestly a really major factor for a lot of women and why they run. There are some folks at the legislature who have made it work and have made that swing happen. There's one in particular who talked very openly about how her children were on kids care, which is the state program for folks that fall in between access and your parents being able to afford care, particularly for children, because her husband is a public school educator and she's just worked jobs to get by. So she actually talked about the $24,000 a year that the legislature makes was a big upgrade for her family, and she could get her kids on state insurance. So for some folks, it actually is a jump up, and you're able to make things swing a little bit better because you've been just making things work. But I think that it really comes down to, flexibility of your job. A lot of folks do have jobs that, again, they work at a nonprofit who says, we love having a state legislator because of your experience, and we recognize that we only get you for 6 months of the year. You know, or that, again, the state legislature doesn't often meet on Fridays, so we get that we just get you on Fridays. And folks who understand that, but I would really talk to your employer first. But again, there are other offices that looks differently. So I'd say that most folks on city councils have a little bit more leeway. Most city councils pay more than the state legislature. So there are often really different time commitments. You have different staff with you that reflects how much time you have. So for example, the state legislature, if you're in the House, you share an assistant with someone else. and you share staff collectively versus if you're a city council member, at least in Tucson, you have 3 to 4 of your own staff members, just you. So that really affects the amount of work that you do and the amount of time that you have outside of that elected office to have another job, or even to do your own childcare so you don't have to have another job, or, you know, figure out all of those other costs in your lives. Candidates who have all of their friends say, I will take care of your childcare for the campaign. That has been like the greatest gift some candidates have said they've ever gotten, is someone who stepped up and said, I'll pick your kids up from school every day. Like, that isn't something you can do while working in campaigning. I can do that. But I think it's all about making it work however you can. And again, that community support that can look different ways. If you have a neighbor who's willing, you know, again, I keep going back to kids because I think that that's where we see some of the biggest struggles. It's with single moms or just moms who are trying to navigate all of that. Is a neighbor who will make sure your kids get home from school or off the bus. Someone will make sure your kids get fed, things like that, that can take off that load so that you can actually campaign. But I think it really depends on that specific office and talking to your employer immediately. The last thing you want is to get in trouble down the line because you filed your statement of interest and did all of these things, and then you lose your job because you didn't do it properly. And then you have to pull out of the race entirely. So I would just, please talk to your employer as soon as you're kind of thinking about those things.
I want to highlight a couple of things related to that. I think that this specific issue can and should inform a lot of choices about what role might be right if you're interested in running for office. So you can find a lot of this information online, how much they get paid because of, you know, wanting to be transparent, kind of when the meetings are. Not always can you find out, you know, how much work actually goes in behind their public meetings, but frequently they're fairly accessible. You could ask your representative, you know, your school board versus your city council, that kind of thing. And one other thing I wanted to highlight is, unlike Tempe City Council, or I guess maybe like it, is Tempe City Council is not a strongman mayor structure, right? The council makes most of the decisions.
Right. It's,
Yeah.
yes.
So actually, it's similar too. So most of us, I mean, we are Junior League of Phoenix, although obviously we represent the whole valley, but the Phoenix City Council, most people see Mayor Kate Gallego as the figurehead, you know, as the representative of the city, but we are not a strongman mayor. So the actual brunt of the policy choices are made by the city council members. And, you know, as Claire just mentioned, they make quite good money. So it is an opportunity to maybe not have to do a lot of public appearances, but represent your, you know, your neighborhood and make a lot of meaningful choices if you're not interested in sort of the gory side of politics. And yeah, a lot of this information is online. So I think I very much encourage you to like go out and ask for it, or ask the politicians themselves. They do look for any excuse to talk to their constituents. So it's okay if your excuse is questions about what they do. And then sort of related to this, I mean, we talked a lot about the commitments, the pros and cons of these different roles, some of the variety of options out there. But I would say that, you know, fundraising is a big barrier for a lot of women. We talked a little bit about how much the role makes can be a barrier, but I think even, you know, most of the people in the room have quite a bit of experience with fundraising just as a function of being a member of the Junior League. But I think all of us are naturally uncomfortable with saying, I'm worth your money. So, you know, maybe Casey, you can speak to that specifically, having to do that. And then maybe both of you can speak to what you tell candidates about why that isn't so bad.
Raising money for a political campaign is hard. It is scary to ask them for money. It's scary to call up your friend and say you need $100 for mail or for lit or for your like campaign staff. It's uncomfortable to ask people for money. It's still worth it. Like, I think I try to think of like this like mediocre man energy of like, he's asking his friends. Like, it's no, like the amount of money I saw someone ask for last night, I was like, you're not even worth it. You're like not qualified. You're not a good person. You said racist stuff. Like, he's running a Democratic primary, so it's not someone on yourself. I'm like, you are not worth this money, and you think you are. And so I try to like channel that to go into this and think of like, if this guy can do it, then I should do it too, because I'm not that person. And like changing homelessness in the city is worth the investment. I think reframing it to like, it's not an investment in me. I don't get this money. I spend a lot of money on the campaign, buying people coffee or whatever. If it's like personal funds. Never tell me not to do that, I'm sure. But like, because if I'm going to show up to an event, like, you know, you're gonna whatever. Anyway, but fundraising is difficult, but people will give you money. You will see that people will surprise you with how much they support you or support your issues. You have to do it all the time. You have to like set a schedule when you're going to call people and you're going to fundraise, and that's just going to be your thing. And that has to happen consistently. Just to do it. So it's hard, but it's worth it. And you can do it, because I hate talking on the phone, and I do it. So like, if I can ask someone for money, I promise you can. I'm a very awkward person, and people write checks. So yeah.
Do you guys want to address the difference between running a clean and then like a traditional fundraising campaign and mechanisms for fundraising?
So we will, we are hopefully going to have someone from the Clean Elections campaign, commission. I don't know why all the C's always trip me up, at our next event. And they can go into a lot of that, but I do think it's important sort of as you inform candidates, like what that candidate level decision looks like versus, you know, what a voter should know.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I want to say is kind of to reiterate off something Casey said is one of my biggest things that I tell candidates is that you are not asking money for yourself, you're asking money for your campaign, a campaign that is bettering your community and everyone in that community. That mindset can make it a lot easier. Because a lot of times, so one, it's uncomfortable to ask for money, like period. I remember being uncomfortable in like middle school doing like school fundraisers for stuff like that was uncomfortable then, and that was like my parents. So it's never fun, but if you're in the mindset, I think what makes it harder is that you feel like you're asking money for yourself because your name is on that campaign, your name is on the ballot, but that money is not going to you. You don't get to spend it however you like. You're not buying a new wardrobe. It's going to this campaign that is working for the betterment of the community, and that is how you should frame it. That's kind of like my big fundraising piece because I know it's scary, and also that it doesn't have to be as big as it is. You're not asking everyone for $5,000. You probably shouldn't be asking people that you don't know for $5,000, but you're asking people that you know for an amount that you think they can give. So it makes it a little bit more approachable to think about like, well, you know what, my grandma could maybe afford $100. She would be comfortable giving me that amount of money. It's easier to ask when you know the person is able to do it. So you don't feel like you're asking someone who could maybe only give you $20 for $1,000, because then you feel more uncomfortable. The question about clean elections, I say it depends on what clean elections is. There's the clean election system for all of like the state legislature and all of the statewide offices. A lot of cities also have their own clean election systems for municipal, and maybe you can talk about that. No, does Tempe not? Okay.
Tucson is like the one.
Okay, cool. Then I guess Tucson is the one that does. Sorry, I'm spoiled. And ours is a matching system. So you can actually, you can get a lot of money from our publicly funded elections. One of our mayoral candidates in 2019 did that. But the one kind of caveat I would say for clean elections is it means you don't have to fundraise as much. Collecting fives is still hard. You need to collect $205 donations from people within your community to even get that clean elections money. And that can be difficult, but also with that is you do have limited funds and limited stipulations. So you have limited amounts to work with the party, which sometimes could have provided some other help, such as access to voter files and things like that. But it does just mean that, say, if you're in a competitive primary, you do have less resources. So I think that running clean is a really good option for folks who are in safer districts where it's really one party controlled, you more just have a primary or their incumbents running, because I think that it does, for a lot of folks, their argument is that you don't have to raise as much money. It makes it so that folks who don't have as much money have an easier time running. But I also think that sometimes it can really hinder you if you're in a really competitive race. And all of a sudden you get to a point where you need more resources, want to do more, and you have a very finite amount of money that you could use. But I do think it's still a good option.
You know, if you look at, you can look up how much candidates raised previously. That's all public. There are Republicans, Democrats, Independents who do not raise as much as they could have raised on clean elections, who like traditional fundraise. And maybe it's easier for them because they can ask people for bigger amounts of money than the fives. But if you're running and like collecting $5 from people at the door is probably helping you build support. And so like, it might be hard, but it's also, you have to collect signatures anyway. So like you have to go talk to people anyway, and you're building up your like base of support. I am incredibly frustrated when people do not use clean elections and then do not raise what they could have raised, because they've taken money from PACs and like large supporters, and then they often don't win, right? Like they don't win because they don't have the support because they didn't put any of the grassroots work in. And so I would look up, what did that office for PAC to raise? What did the winners raise? And can you raise it on clean elections? And if you can't, like, don't do it. You know, I mean, like you said, there are some state house races that, like, if you don't raise $100,000, you're not going to win. And on clean elections, you'll get 46-ish. So that race is different. If you're in D26, you can run clean because you're going to win in the primary. Or I don't know, other races that are strongholds. But clean elections is great. Tucson is great. If you live in Tucson, go run clean on Tucson City Council. And every city should copy it. It's fantastic. City should have clean elections, but it's only right now for statewide offices. So state legislature and sort of up, it doesn't apply to like justice of the peace and those kinds of races.
Or it sounds like we'll have to send a recording of this to the Community League of Tucson. Since you highlighted excellent resources. You know, this is another instance where you can find this information online, right? So Clean Elections makes a lot of their information incredibly accessible. Something else to think about maybe as you're looking at different positions, whether that's of interest. I mean, I know Casey's background comes from that grassroots structure. So although not accessible in your current candidacy, like, you know, maybe Clean Elections seemed more accessible because she's used to a large number of people, a smaller dollar amount. Sarah's, at least the campaigns that I highlighted in her bio, they're not as maybe grassroots focused, or maybe that's inaccurate, but they're big money races. They're these huge statewide races. So maybe how does that look different?
I mean, yeah, I've worked on, you know, a bunch of like multi-million-dollar statewide campaigns. So certainly that's a little bit of a different environment. I would say one thing on my side of the aisle is there are a number of, you know, candidates and quite frankly, sort of voters or potential donors who are just like philosophically opposed to government elections. And so that's a different quirk, I would say that we see sort of on my side of the aisle around clean elections. But I really do think what Claire said about sort of framing the thinking around fundraising is important. A female candidate who's running this cycle was talking to me about how she thinks about fundraising. And what she said was, and she's done a lot of philanthropic, you know, kind of fundraising in the past, more in like the 501c3 space. And she said, you know, most people put aside some money in their budget for giving to causes that they believe in, whether it's, you know, tithing at your church or a nonprofit that you support. And a fair number of people will think, okay, I'm going to spend, you know, X number of dollars this year on, you know, giving to candidates. But most people have that sort of budget of giving to causes they believe in. If you think about fundraising as, let me help people allocate that budget. Like they're already going to spend this money on something. Let me convince them that I should be part of that allocation. Is sort of how she framed it in her mind. And I thought that was sort of helpful and something that I had.
Kind of related to that, maybe fundraising will be the thing you think of, but we got a question about an issue, or maybe I would put a concern that's unique to women, either in a campaign or once they're in elected office. Sounds like childcare probably in many instances, fundraising sometimes, but anything else maybe you want to add?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is kind of a traditional one that folks think about is that women are often hit a lot harder on appearances, and women are often most critical of themselves in appearances. So I've had a number of conversations with candidates who are like, I really want to run for the legislature, but like, I'm not someone who wears like pantsuits and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know why you think you need to do that. Like, there are a number of legislators who show up and wear what for them is most comfortable, and maybe they're a little bit older and they don't wear dresses and they never wear heels, but that's totally fine. Professionalism looks different for everyone, and that I found is actually really a large hurdle to get over, is this mindset of what a politician looks like or what someone in this role looks like. Your hair doesn't have to be cut in a certain way. You don't have to wear makeup if you don't wear makeup. Like, all of these things are not as much of real barriers as barriers that we as women put up for ourselves. Thinking about, like, Casey's talked about criticism that she's gotten on her age, on her voice, things like that. Casey and I have talked about this as someone who was also quite young. Those things can be hard, but having the confidence in yourself to say, yes, I am young, but I actually bring a really different perspective to the board, and that's why I'm young. I understand that I'm young, and maybe I am, I dress a little bit differently than what you would expect, but this is for me still professional and what I'm comfortable in, and I can do my job. And so understanding that those things are not as big of a barrier as they need to, you are still going to get comments on, oh, you cut your hair, I liked it this way, or I didn't. Or someone like halfway through a conversation is like, you look great, by the way. And you're like, oh, did you listen to anything I heard? I don't think so. That's still going to happen, but I think a lot of times that's a barrier that women build up for themselves and kind of hinder themselves in that front. And it's kind of that lack of confidence and feeling like you are able to do this.
Casey, I know you had a little bit of a reaction to one of those statements, but do you have anything else maybe that you weren't expecting that you come across as an issue? Obviously, it probably feels most real to you, the comment on appearance, but yeah, other things you didn't think about as a concern, but now are aware of.
Yeah, I didn't think people would tell me to my face about my appearance, positive or negative, whatever. I mean, it's all negative, right? Because no one wants their appearance commented on. So like, even if they're complimenting you, it's still really uncomfortable and feels gross. You look like a younger, hotter Kirsten Cinema. Like, not a compliment. That's a weird thing to say to someone. It's not helpful. Also, like, I don't think we look that similar. So like, you just think like women in politics look like one thing. Weird comments. That I was not expecting that to happen as frequently as it did. Or enough that like, I thought people would have maybe the like, be shy enough to do it once the door was closed. I think there are so many good things though. Like, I wasn't expecting as much support as people had, like people from high school who I wasn't, like didn't keep in touch with, saying, can I have a yard sign? I still live in Tempe. Can I, like, how do I help you? How do I support you? And so I think there are a lot of things that, like, when I think of the unexpected, it's positives. It's the amount of support that comes in. It's who comes out of like the woodwork of Facebook, who you're still connected with, virtually, but you haven't talked to since you were 18. And they're in your community, or like folks from church who have known me since I was a child and want to vote for me, which is always interesting when someone has like seen you grow up. But the people who've seen you grow up like will support you. And so those are the things that I think are more surprising, because you think like only political people care about politics or want to support someone, like people already in politics. And they're just community members. They're just your friends, your friend who like started teaching at the school that you went to. She wants to show up and support you in whatever way that looks like for her.
Do you have anything else that you want to highlight?
Well, so I feel like this is super interesting and I don't know if this is as helpful to the group, because again, I'm sort of coming from the perspective of these like major statewide campaigns where you're like on TV. But like, yes, you know, some of that stuff is going to happen, but also in a campaign like that, you have usually the opportunity to get some qualitative data through things like focus grouping and polling and survey work that will help you either address issues, you know, in the most positive way, or you know, just frame the, you know, imagery of your ads. I mean, you have an opportunity to test some of these kinds of things in ways that can be sort of helpful to make sure that they are as successful as you want them to be. So certainly that's for, you know, a certain smaller group of campaigns that are going to be in that scale. But I think there's real opportunity to bring a lot of quantitative and qualitative data into the process about how you're framing issues, how you're presenting yourself and your story as a candidate, that can help just help you do your best possible job, do your best possible foot forward.
Yeah, so I mean, just to kind of highlight what Sarah's saying, it is definitely not unheard of, but it is unlikely that most first-time political candidates are going to jump to a congressional seat, the governor of Arizona, right? Like it is a big barrier just because it is a big endeavor in monetary, time, everything. That is not to say you should let it discourage you. People have done it. People do it. Men do it all the time, right? But in those, so I guess sort of just to compare, Casey mentioned having data people. I was a little surprised. It's hard merely to get the data for a race the size of Tempe City Council. I mean, Tempe is not a small city, but it's hard. You're not going to necessarily get polling, except for, you know, exit polls maybe. Whereas when you're talking about a congressional seat, that is why you kind of, most of those candidates are, you know, not only going to hire often a semi-professional campaign manager, or they're going to be affiliated with a group like Arizona List, Emily List, some kind of national or state level support system. Because yeah, there is a lot of tools that can help you be a candidate, especially once you're doing many televised appearances. I know Casey's done a couple, right? But not every day like you would be at a statewide race. But yeah, there is support there, and so that's something to look for if you are wanting to be a first-time candidate for a race that big. You need a support group, not just friends and family, but professionals to ease your way. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was Casey mentioned, I guess, sort of your pleasant surprise of having childhood friends, neighbors, teachers, you know, want to contribute to your campaign. I know that a couple of different trainings that I've been to, one of them mentioned that if you want to run for office, you should sit down and you should literally go through every phase of your life and say, who would I feel comfortable reaching out to by email or by phone call to ask for money? You know, it felt like a monumental endeavor. Claire is nodding, so I'm sure this is an activity she asked people to do in Arizona List trainings, and once you're actually a candidate, you basically have to. And I would say it's surprising and it's not surprising. We probably all, to a limited degree, pulled our immediate circle for financial donations to junior league things, right? And most of the time, they're very happy to donate this amount they keep to the side for causes they care about. It's very similar to that, but it is something to also think about. What networks do you have in your life? What networks would you maybe want to reconnect with and emphasize over the next couple of years if you are looking down the road to run for something? Because that is really where you're going to get not always the biggest. If you are in a large race and you are taking, you know, PAC donations, maybe that's going to be a bigger dollar amount, but certainly the largest volume of your donations as a candidate are going to come from people you know personally, which again goes to that fundraising point. It makes it a little easier. You have a pre-existing relationship with this person that you can call on. Okay, so we have a couple other questions. we had a very specific one, but I think we can open it up a little bit more. If someone wanted to run for school board, what would be a good starting point? But I would say, you know, maybe at that local position level, we talked a little bit about finding those issue areas and maybe going to events for them, but it's COVID, right? So there aren't as many in-person town hall kind of things. What's a good way for someone to reach out and maybe tee up in the next year or two a local campaign? Yeah, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so speaking as someone who is currently in conversations with a lot of women who are starting to tee up for next November, I would say that one of the biggest points is finding where and when those meetings are and attending. Some are definitely still happening in person, some are not. I will say Tucson, ours are not, they're virtually streamed. But making yourself a presence known. If you are considering a very recent run, particularly in the next year, talk to the school board members. Particularly if there is someone who is leaving and not returning, talk to them. They are often trying to recruit someone to fulfill whatever specific role they filled in for. Sometimes someone is the only parent of a special needs child, or the only person who's a teacher on the board. Oftentimes people feel, especially on school boards, we have a board of about 5 people, you often fill a specific role or handle specific issues that you're the leader on, someone's a doctor on the board, things like that. They'll be looking for a replacement who fits some of their identities or some of the things that they stand for. And talk to them and see if you're that person. They can give you a lot of support, such as, hey, here are the people who volunteered on my campaign. Here are the people who helped me. I think that that's one of the biggest resources. And then just getting to know the people who are really passionate about those issues and advocating for that. So school board, who are the folks who are working on education issues within this district? Who are the people in the PTO that are really active that I definitely need their support? Who are those people that you need to know in that community to build that support? And just start doing it now before you've decided to run. It's a lot easier to get that support when you're just wanting to get involved versus looking for a volunteer, looking for buy-in for your campaign. It's a little bit easier to get that buy-in after you've already built the relationship and then announce that you're running.
If you have something to add, go ahead.
I think, so I started attending meetings regularly a year before I announced. So I think that that's right on. I would say there are trainings online that will help you to decide what office or decide how to get involved, or just calculate a win number. How many votes do I need and how do I find that information? Or how do I market something? How do I do a digital ad? And so there are trainings online that are available to folks. And so doing a couple of those, webinar style things that are available for free, I think is helpful to understand what you're getting into. But meet with someone who has that position and find out what do they do. And then take it all with a grain of salt, because you're not gonna copy their campaign, you're gonna do something else.
I think there's not much to add other than to say, yes, if you can talk to somebody who's on the school board, or find somebody that you know and trust who's run for something. Again, when Doug Ducey was trying to figure out what to run for, he sat down with Senator Putt. He wasn't looking to run for US Senate. He was just like, hey, tell me more about how this works and how should I be thinking about this. So I think Nicole is going to send around our contact information for those interested. If you have more questions after this, we are happy, I think, to be that sort of point of contact to help be a traffic cop that points you in the right direction to information you might be looking for from somebody who has more specific experience.
One thing I will also say, based on how close we are, it doesn't feel like it, but for people who work in politics, we are very close to the 2022 election. We're in that campaign year. It's very unlikely that someone would choose to declare for any but the smallest offices between now and then. So I would recommend, one good way to see what positions are elected in your area are by looking at your ballot. If you don't know what that person does, look it up. I would say Justice of the Peace was mentioned, school board, both of those are very small district specific. So there are a lot of positions available throughout the state. But, and we'll talk about this a little bit more at our next event, about how, when you're looking at your ballot, but, you know, you do get a voter guide, literally the shortest Google, you can find out, you know, what they make, what their duties are. And so I would encourage you to look and kind of spend some time with maybe those positions that are less well-known. I definitely can say, you know, 2 weeks ago was the first time I really found out what the county treasurer does. So like, we're always learning. There's many, many positions and many levels of government. So I encourage you to do that research.
Justice of the Peace has a small district but a nice salary. So that's like a full-time job that you could actually give up a job. So
Yeah.
if you're looking for a job that's a smaller campaign, but you could do full-time.
And
You have to
40.
hold on to that, right?
You do not.
No, so
Most
I was gonna say
justices
that,
do
if you
not.
have ever wanted to be a judge and you didn't go to law school, Justice of the Peace is elected, and you do not need to go to law school to be a Justice of the Peace. It doesn't mean we maybe don't want lawyers to be Justices of the Peace. It's a separate issue, but you certainly don't have to. And I mean, just to sort of respond to Alicia's question in the room, I think they make 70 something K. So, I mean, a good salary, obviously, public benefits, 40-hour work week, perhaps slightly less than that even. And, you know, they preside over their courtroom for small claims under $75,000, I think is the cutoff. So if you're interested in, you know, getting to know the people in your area, the Justice of the Peace sees them all the time for small claims. So it's something else to look into. And yeah, there's one in, I mean, I can't remember if it falls exactly. It's voting district, it's not school district, but it's about that size. It's pretty small, so.
And some tend to be smaller just depending upon where exactly you are. So like in Tucson, we have a massive school district, but we have about 10 justices. And just also, I wanted to really quickly add on, some of the smaller, lower down offices also, I realize I'm really muffled, also have different timelines. So school board races, for example, are considered nonpartisan, which means that they aren't on the primary ballot in August, only November. So your signatures aren't due until August compared to races that have a primary where your signatures are due in April and May. So you do actually like have a little bit more time due to like some different constraints. So maybe you can say like, I can't run a race for an entire year. I can run a campaign for 4 months. Then school board might fit that more. So like sometimes there are just those things that like, you have a primary and a general, you technically have 2 races. You run for a nonpartisan office, you might only have 1. Like there are just also some funky things that come with the different offices and when they're held and things like that.
So we got an interesting question in the chat that I really appreciate, but I'll be interested to see to what extent you guys can answer. So they asked, how do you utilize your network when running or applying for judicial office? There aren't really campaigns and fundraising, but they're highly political. So I'll speak to it a little bit. I don't know how, like, with our larger Supreme Court, if maybe you were involved with any of that with the governor, or, you know, I don't know that Arizona List.
We don't touch judicial
Yeah,
positions
so-
actually because we have our candidates sign a contract. So we don't touch those. Right
So judicial appointments in Arizona have a multi-level application process. Other than Justice of the Peace, you obviously have to be an attorney. You have to be an attorney in good standing. But you fill out this application, you submit it to a merit board that is made up of attorneys, and I believe maybe 1 or 2 non-attorneys that are, depending on the level, appointed by the governor. There's multiple rounds of interviews, et cetera. There are like a couple final candidates, and then I think depending on the level of the seat, the governor gets to appoint that person. I do know the governor gets to appoint the judges to the Supreme Court, but you will notice that they are on the ballot. They're on the ballot for removal. So it's a little different. Just very quickly, other states, many judges are elected. So not the same everywhere, but in Arizona, we like to sort of keep the legal field by itself, and then only sort of bad behavior, whether that's professional or personal, will get you yanked if the voters or a campaign for removal highlights that enough to get the votes. It's incredibly rare. I can't say I know of a time when we have recalled a judge by the
The
ballot.
1970s.
Okay, so before all of our time,
I
but
think
perhaps
that's
you
like
can speak to it.
1978, but you can check me on that.
Okay.
Because I think the last time somebody straight up lost a retention election. I think there may have been some ones that are been close. But that guy had like
Awful.
terrible marks
Yeah.
across the board on like ethics, and so I don't think this is.
But to highlight that there will be some judges on the ballot next fall. In the voter guide that you get, it has polling from attorneys that appear in front of the judges, and what their, response rate is, like how happy they are with the judge's performance. I have seen members of the public, say, oh, this person is, X political position, therefore we should just vote them out. I am biased because I am an attorney. I think if they're doing their job well and the people who are their stakeholders, i.e. the lawyers that appear in front of them, are happy with them, then they're probably fine. But that's something for you guys to look at the ballot and in your voter guide next fall. Yeah, I don't know, has anyone worked on or tangentially related to any, I don't know, removal or appointment campaign? I mean, a campaign for appointment is very much not a public thing, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, inside baseball because of the sort of
Yeah.
merit selection process. And I think to your point, Nicole, it's very much about having a good reputation sort of among your peers and being prepared to answer a lot of questions about your sort of judicial philosophy in terms of how do you see the responsibility of the judiciary to interpret laws.
Yeah, I would say to Renee's question, and for anyone who is watching now or later, that is interested in this in the future, I would say it's worth speaking to either a highly placed political attorney or a judge themselves about sort of what that process looks like. I think you need to obviously do well in your career and be a known entity in the community, but there is not a uniform, just like we were talking about with other elected positions, there is not a uniform background required. Not everyone is a prosecutor, et cetera. They want the judicial branch to have a variety of backgrounds. So anyone could do it as long as you are a good attorney. So poor Allison, she mentioned her question early and she's restated it because I haven't touched on it yet, but I think that it is a kind of a good wrap up of a lot of things we've been talking about. She was asking maybe how you as a candidate or how you suggest to candidates to maintain boundaries when they are running or when they are in public office, boundaries on their time, personal or philosophical boundaries, like sort of how do you, I don't know if she would go this far, but how do you maintain like time and space for yourself in this role that is very public and for others? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So, in the campaigns that I've worked on, I would say sort of the big element to this is the staff. And part of that is, the candidate's going to do the things that only the candidate can do in a major statewide race. I mean, they're going to do the fundraising, they're going to go to the appearances, they're going to participate in the debate. But, delegating to your staff and having a staff that you really trust to get a lot of the nuts and bolts of, paying the bills and filing the paperwork on time is really important. And the other thing I would say to that is sort of making those boundaries or things really clear. So again, kind of going back to my experience with Doug Ducey, he's got 3 sons. They're all very athletic. And we scheduled a lot in the campaign to make sure that he could go to, Sam's hockey game. And maybe that meant he was going to show up, in a suit and tie after he was, at some sort of event for the campaign, but he would be there. And so, again, if you're sort of in that situation where you're working with the staff and they're going to help you manage and consider all of the requests on your time, because quite frankly, you're going to get more than you can possibly handle. Having this clear, like, hey, this is what's important to me and my family. This is time that I need with my family. This is when we're having, my in-laws anniversary dinner. Like, you can schedule around all of that. And also bring in, we would call them surrogates, folks to speak on your behalf if you can't be at every event. So you might send a field staffer, you might send, a trusted advisor to go and accept an invitation on your behalf to speak to a group and make the case for you as a candidate, sort of depending on what's important to you. And every candidate, I think, will be different. Some candidates are real morning people, like they want to schedule all their stuff early in the day. Others, like me, are definitely night owls and, would prefer to attend evening events, dinners. And it's really knowing yourself and what works well for you and having that support system you build around you, adapt to that and respect that.
Yeah, so I think that is absolutely true. Building around those things that are for you crucial that you do not want to miss outside of the campaign. But also one thing that I would say that helps with that is use a Google Calendar that you have your staff on. I would much rather have on my phone knowing that you have a dentist appointment and Bible study and your kid's like piano lesson than trying to schedule something and being like, I didn't know your kid had soccer practice every day that you had to pick them up for. I wouldn't have scheduled this. Like just being really transparent about things that you do not want to miss. Things can be moved around and they can be scheduled, but if no one knows that those are your expectations or things that you like to miss, that's when things get hard. The other thing that I would say is that people who have kids and are used to managing schedules are really good at this, but I have seen candidates get eaten by campaigns when they don't have much else in their lives. So if you don't have kids, you don't have something else going on, and you say, well, I can 24/7 campaign, that's really hard on you as a person. And you need to carve out, even if it's like, this is when I watch The Bachelor with my best friend, do that. Put that as busy on your schedule. Have some time to yourself. Have people that you talk to about things other than the campaign. Remember that you are a person outside of the campaign. Because come election day, win or lose, you're still you, whether or not you get that position. And so if you spend 8 months making your entire life this campaign, and all you do is live and breathe this campaign, and you don't talk to any of your friends, you don't work, you don't do anything, and then come election day and you're a little bit short and you lose, what happens then? Make sure that you still have your support team with you, that you are still you outside of this campaign.
Casey, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you have to have your non-negotiables. Your staff needs to know what those are. And having time away is so important. Like if friends, I went to a friend's birthday and they asked me about the campaign, being able to say like, it's going well, I prefer not to talk about it while we're here. Like, I want to enjoy a friend's birthday. This is about me, not about me. And like having friends that you just get to talk about like TV or pop culture or for me football with is really important to still be a person and then have non-negotiables and then don't negotiate on them. Like if you have to be at if you have to have date night once a week, you have to have date night once a week. That's your thing. If you have to be at church, you have to be at church. Whatever your thing is, I think is important.
Go ahead. So we talk about sort of more like the work-life balance aspect of campaigning and being in politics, but can you speak to the balance between sort of coming across as being authentic as a candidate and sort of boundaries there, especially with social media and the fact that people want to just know more and know everything, right? And it kind of makes it right to the picture there and everything now. So how do you balance that, right? I think a lot of people, with politics now, they see just get dirty and people like to have their privacy. So how do you balance?
Oh, I think everybody could hear it, but just for the recording, how do you balance natural desire for privacy and also, as you said, that boundary of like who you are as a separate person versus wanting to appear authentic and as a whole person as a candidate. You want to start there?
Yeah. Sorry, these were like the worst earrings to wear. There's just like a small gap in the back. Keep getting caught. But I absolutely love that question. I think that is a really hard boundary to realize. And I think a lot of that comes down to who you are in your campaign. What are you running as? Are you running as someone who identifies with your job? Are you running as someone who identifies as a mom? Are you running as someone who identifies with issues? What is it about your campaign that you are running as? And one big rule of thumb that I always use, I'm a little bit younger, so this is easier for me, is if I wouldn't want my grandma to see it, I don't put it online. Because realize that, and the other thing is if you wouldn't want to see it in the paper, don't put it online. So I think there's absolutely no problem with, say, going to drinks and putting that on your social media. But think about, is that the only thing you put on your social media? Thinking about those things in moderation, because realizing that people who often just look at your social media, even if it's you have a personal account and a campaign account, your personal account is still you and the campaign if it's public. If it's private, I think you can get a little bit more leeway, but also remember who follows it. They can take screenshots and reshare things. But again, just think about if you wouldn't want it to show up in the paper, it's something you think might not reflect well on your campaign, or you have hesitations, or maybe you don't want to answer questions about said thing at a campaign event, I would keep it off of your campaign social media. And again, your personal, make things private. There's no reason everyone you've ever met should be, or anyone should be able to look at your Instagram if you don't let them. And if there are people that you don't feel comfortable on your personal account that say you don't actually know personally, I would say feel free to remove them. I know that it's a weird thing in the age of like social media, of like, is it okay to unfriend someone or whatever? But like when it comes to, at least in the campaign, your personal pages that are not the campaigns, do with that what makes you feel nice. If there are people that, you know, are good friends of yours that post the most obnoxious things in the world, you can mute people. If there are people who are just constantly commenting on your stuff, asking about the campaign or criticizing you, feel free to mute those people or have a conversation with someone and say, hey, this is actually my personal account. You know, if you have questions, you can ask my campaign, but I don't feel comfortable with you doing that. But I would say it's about really what your campaign is reflective of you. So again, if you're running as a teacher, I would have your social media be a lot about being a teacher. It doesn't mean you post photos of the kids who teach because you're not supposed to do that, but have it be reflective of what you are running as and that personality that you're running on. That should be authentic to who you are, but it doesn't have to be 100% who you are.
I talk about this with other candidates about how to be authentic and share, you know, things about myself and still have privacy or still like have some things that are just for me. And I think it's really hard. I talk about being chronically ill. I think that's like part of my story. I don't post on social media, like got my results at the oncologist office. Like my friend is who I tell, and my friend is who like goes to the appointment. Social media doesn't like go to that appointment with me. And so I think that that is like, there are things that you can like be authentic on and not share everything, because people don't deserve everything. Like people deserve the information you can trust with them. And that's maybe not like what your blood cell counts are. Like that's like a really specific thing that like your doctor needs and you need, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think these guys have done a good job of kind of characterizing this. You know, I would say err on the side of, you know, being judicious and probably err on the side of restraint. But certainly there are plenty of things that you can share about who you are that connects with people, whether it's, you know, posting about, you know, being at your kid's soccer game because being a dad is a really important part of who you are as a person. You know, or fun kind of just like trivia things that people can connect with. And you know, we put out, I think, like 50 things you might not know about Doug Ducey on his 50th birthday during the 2014 campaign. And there were all kinds of kind of interesting things, like he ran a marathon that people might not have known and could connect with in some way, but you know, wasn't overly personal.
Yeah, and so I think kind of to all of your points, like there's always the opportunity in the future to share more, but you can't pull it back once it's out there. Especially because no matter if that post is deleted or not, you know, we all know the internet sort of never forgets. So something to keep in mind too, yeah, now, if you're thinking of a possible run in the future, and that sort of leads to the question that I wanted to ask. You know, how do you respond to two potential candidates or two candidates if it's an actively evolving situation, but I think reasonably, a lot of people would feel like there's a barrier if they have a teenage indiscretion or a family member has something that would naturally come out in a, probably not school board, but like a larger campaign, and they're worried about, you know, obviously they would talk to that family member, but so let's say personally, you know, they have a DUI in their past and the internet never forgets that that information is public knowledge, it will come out. Like, how do you counsel those candidates? And how much do you think that can affect their chances?
So I think that all comes down to like the really specifics of that, like case by case basis. I've worked with candidates that have lost races because of parking tickets that someone used against them in a campaign. That example was actually presented on in 2012. She lost because of that, because someone used unpaid parking tickets against her. But I also think that if you are aware of that going on and are upfront and can say at some point, you know what, in my past, using a DUI as an example, I had a DUI, I made a mistake. I have made up for it. It is, I do not drink and drive anymore. I absolutely do not condone that. It is something that I apologize for, but it happened 20 years ago and I can't change my past. It will likely not come up again. But it's about addressing those things if you know they're going to come out. The other thing that I would say is if you have something that you really don't want to come out, maybe rethink about running for office if it's something that you do not want to be public, because the odds are that it will. There's something in your past that you want no one to ever know, but you know that it could be found. Rethink about running for office sometimes. And I know that that sounds really harsh and this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but there are specific instances where someone says, you know, a partner of mine has immigration issues and I never want this to come out ever. If there's a chance that that comes out and you know that you are risking your partner being deported or something like that, maybe rethink about running for office and the risks that that comes with. Again, it's a bit of an extreme case, but I've talked to candidates in this position where you don't want to further endanger yourself or someone that you know. But again, if it's a child of yours, kids make mistakes, everyone makes mistakes, but being honest about that and saying, you know what, my child is not this campaign. They are not running for office, and I don't really think it's appropriate to talk about my kids. Is actually a really good response to anything child related that comes up, because again, your kids are not running for office and they shouldn't have to. But just approaching things like that.
Yeah, I think there's a real difference too between if there's something that's involving you personally and something involving a family member, even if it's public, like what people would reasonably bring up. But I would echo the being aware of it from the outset, making sure your team knows and you've got a plan in place. So, you know, again, kind of going back to a Doug Ducey example, we knew that there were franchisees who had a bad experience with full-term programming, but that the majority of franchisees had a really positive experience. And so we made sure, you know, to engage some of the majority that had that positive experience and be prepared for that minority, you know, smaller group of people who maybe didn't have the good experience to say something negative by saying, actually, you know, here's the flip side of the story. Here are voices that represent what most people's experience was. And by being prepared for that, I mean, at the very, very beginning of the campaign, you're not stuck, you know, with a pit in your stomach when that information comes out or you know, when somebody delivers that criticism.
Does anyone else have any questions? I think I got all the ones in the chat, but please let us know if you guys have any more. Okay, so yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. The breadth of experience, the depth of experience has been tremendously useful, I think, and hopefully this will continue to be a resource for our members with the reporting of this. So if you guys would help me in thanking our panelists for being here this morning.